Okay, so it's right on 12:30, so I think that we'll start the webinar. Thank you very much for your time today and for logging in. Today we'll spend 45 minutes taking you through how to build the resilient business. My name is Cholena Orr and I'm the Director of PAC Executive. Now at today's agenda, we'll start with an introduction to the team, and I'll take you through the three coaches who'll be speaking today, and they'll talk you through how to build a resilient business. Now that should take us to the 45-minute mark. If you care to stick around, we'd be happy to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. After the webinar today, we will be recording, and I can send you a link so that you'll have access to this later. Any questions, please feel free to use the chat function of the webinar, and I'll be keeping an eye on that and asking the coaches those questions at the end of the session. So first of all, I'd like to thank Kell, Matt and Kim for taking the time to speak today, and sorry, that should be Kimberley. Now, I'll just talk you through the backgrounds of the coaches, and we'll start with Dr. Kell Tremayne. And did I get your name?
You got that right.
Yeah, perfect, excellent. No one gets Cholena right either. Now, Kell trained as a psychologist specialising in elite performance and works with people in many different fields to enable them to focus on those things that matter most to people. These include surgeons under time pressure to complete the job before the anaesthetic wears off, bankers to have to tune out the white noise and focus on their big ticket deals, lawyers who have to think logically under intense pressure, Olympic gold medalists who have to manage the pressure, expectations and the intensity of competition, and knowledge workers who have to deal with information overload, hundreds of emails and feeling stretched and overwhelmed. Kell has had much success with senior executives of some of Australia's leading companies. As a former competitive diver and academic university medalist, performance is something Kell not only researches and studies, but something in which he has plenty of first-hand experience. Kell's passion is centred around enabling people to make the most of themselves, their time and their lives. Thanks again for your time today, Kell. Now, we also have the lovely Kimberley Hannagan sitting beside me, and that's not to say you're not lovely, Kell. Now, Kimberley makes connections between people, processes, concepts and ideas. She is thus a natural facilitator, mediator, process builder, negotiator and conflict resolver. Her expertise has been honed in the banking and finance industry with lawyers and working with federal, state and local government. And I'm sure there's a lot of stories to be told there. We'll leave that for another webinar. Kimberley's enthusiasm for her work is strongly connected with her belief that workplaces should be just and engaging, and that performance and productivity are driven by these qualities. She is a strong advocate for building positive workplace culture, transparent and principled communications, and robust process as the road to success. In short, for treating people like people. Kimberley has taught MBA and other academic programs and delivered training, development and coaching in workplaces for over 17 years. As a former student and instructor of drama and performance, she is keenly aware of making any learning experiential and alive. Thanks again, Kimberley, for your time. Now, Matt, how do you pronounce your name? Lumsdaine?
Lumsdaine.
Lumsdaine. Got it right.
Awkward spellings.
Yeah. Now, Matt provides mentoring, training and keynote speaking and workshop facilitation. He teaches that we can transform conflict into creative, constructive activity and finds massive productivity gains through peace and helps implement that knowledge for leaders and in their organisations. Both productivity and creativity can get lost in the battleground of business unless we provide the right type of leadership and support. His core focus is empowering confident and influential leaders, creating effective business and cultures free of unproductive conflict, and increasing well-being in the workplace and beyond. Having studied and taught philosophy for more than 25 years in parallel with a successful corporate career, Matt has dedicated his life to the pursuit of wisdom. However, he is no armchair philosopher. His passion is the practical application and true knowledge to improve our business, society, and indeed our own lives. So thanks again, team, for joining us today.
Okay.
Great. Now I'll hand over to Kimberley and she can get us started.
Welcome everybody to this afternoon session. We're going to be talking to you about the 5 pillars of a resilient business. Now, what is resilience? Resilience is a quality which refers to the ability to endure, to bounce back. Although I can see that there's a picture of us just floated up there, so now you know what we look like. So resilience is referring to the ability to endure, to bounce back when pressure is applied, and to restore and maintain strength and cohesiveness even when conditions are variable, changing and unpredictable. Resilience in business then, what's that all about? It's a quality, and it's the same thing in people really, where people are able to swing with the punches, where people can flex and adapt as situations arrive, and in which they don't lose the sense of direction and sense of clarity and purpose and their own identity in the process. And it's these businesses that are agile. It's a description that is used increasingly in the workplace, the agility in business, so that they're responsive, rather like an athlete, that springs energetically, gracefully through the challenges, rather than loses form, that loses the direction in which they're travelling. So like an athlete, this is a result of the combination of practiced, familiar form and fluidity in the moment, which is really quite a challenging thing to keep your direction and yet be fluid enough to be able to move as things change. And how to build this resilience is today's topic. As you can see, what you're now looking at is our resilient business, which is supported here by the 5 pillars. These foundational pillars are clarity in execution, and engagement, working with other people, and being able to work effectively with oneself. Now, if we were to look at pillar 1, clarity. This is it, where a business has clarity, what we're talking about there is a really clear vision. Knowing the big picture and knowing what the business is working towards, what the business needs to do, the values that the business stands for. And this is key and fundamental to business resilience. However, it's absolutely imperative then that that vision is able to be carried forward. And without the skills of execution, without the ability to bring that to life, a lot of that vision can be lost along the way. So a business might have excellent clarity on the big picture. However, if they don't have the right people in place with the right balance of skills, or perhaps their teams lack skills in just getting the right stuff done and good work habits and methodology, then that vision may not be carried through. The next pillar is talking about engagement. Now, a business might have the first 2 pillars in place, great clarity around what needs to be done and the right people with great skills in execution. But then there's this other space. People need to actually be what we call engaged in what they do. What does that mean? They need to actually value and be interested in what they're doing. A resilient business maintains people's interest and their enthusiasm for what they do, and they make sure that they are able to really work through using people's strengths in the best possible way to carry out that vision. Let's look at the 4th pillar. Now, I don't like to say this too often, but there's I think Eisenhower said something like, any plan, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And while I don't like to say that working with other people is necessarily contact with the enemy, we all know how challenging it can be from time to time to actually share our ideas and share our vision with other people. And as soon as we add other people into the mix, a whole array of new challenges arrives that may get in the way or may be an obstacle to our business resilience. So some of these challenges might include conflictual sorts of communication. It might be that people simply just don't see eye to eye, and they might become very positional around the way they negotiate and the way they work together. So without having some sort of clear guidance around communication and the way people work together, our business can still have a very serious Achilles heel. Our last pillar, all of these other things might be in place and still a business might lack resilience. And this is around what happens when a person's life itself is compromising our ability to be able to work effectively. A business can be made vulnerable where individuals are struggling with stress perhaps. They lack attention and mindfulness and the ability to focus. Or perhaps they're struggling with very poor life balance and aren't living in a way that is maintainable, that is sustainable. I would like to now hand over to Matt, who is going to talk to you about the first two pillars of our resilient business, clarity and execution.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, I'm going to talk about clarity and execution, and these are two things that you'd really like to think were just basics in business and that they were a given, that the vision of the business was shared and the capabilities were in place. But that's not usually the case. And I'd just like to share some numbers to help illustrate this. So 2.1, what does this refer to? It refers to the amount of time we spend consumed by interruptions, and that's been suggested to be 2.1 hours a day. And is it any wonder that we're feeling like we're doing less and it's taking more time? 70%. Well, 70% of the emails we're CC'd in on have no relevance to us whatsoever, and I'm sure most of you will be quite familiar with that. The trouble is that they still steal some of our time and our attention. 34% of employees report checking their emails constantly. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that this is multitasking at its very worst. Multitasking is a real productivity killer, and it's really low-hanging fruit if you can get on top of it. Stop multitasking and start paying attention to what you need to do. 6 weeks per year lost looking for information we already have. For most of you, that's half as much time again as you have annual leave. Wouldn't you like to get some of that back? And 60% of our time is spent on activities which will have no impact in the long term. Now, I think it's one of the issues we have to face. Too much short-term thinking, not enough long-term thinking, and perhaps this is one of the reasons. So these are some pretty incredible numbers, I know. How does it happen? Well, it boils down to this statement. Most people have never been taught how to work. Now, probably many of you are quite high achievers, and you find this a little bit of a strange statement. But the fact is, we go to school and we learn there. We go to university, perhaps, and we learn there. And when we get to work, we're not really sat down and told how to do it. A lot of the time, we're just left to our own devices. So let's just work through a bit of an example here. Let's start with the fact that we have paper files to deal with. You need to organise your paper, and you probably use a filing system, either on your desk, in a drawer, or in a cupboard. And if anyone's desk looks a little bit like this, they're probably already starting to feel a little bit anxious. We were going to ask you to send in some photos of your desks, but that might just chew up a little bit of bandwidth. It might be a bit embarrassing. But when we ask people why they choose their system, most people say they've just sort of worked it out as they've gone along, worked out what seemed to work for them, because people haven't been taught how to do it. What about email, the dreaded email? Have any of you ever been stressed out or overwhelmed by the amount of email you're getting? I dare say you have. I can still remember the first time I received an email, and I felt pretty important. It was pretty exciting. I thought I'd really made it because someone had deemed it to send me an electronic message. Well, I can tell you I don't get the same sense of significance these days when an email comes into my box. Now, most of us are just given our email software to deal with. You're given Outlook or Lotus Notes, and just, it's expected that you know how to deal with it. But when we do ask people how they deal with it, how they manage their emails, most people say, well, I open it up first thing in the morning, I check in between meetings, I check it when I'm having a coffee, I check it all day, and then I check it again when I get home after work. When we ask them if this is the best way to do it, they often reply, I don't know, I've never been shown how to manage my emails. What about working out how to get through the list of tasks and the things that we have to do during the day? Most of you will recognise this. We all like to manage by to-do lists. We start every day with a to-do list. It grows during the day. Some things get ticked off. At the end of the day, we're usually left with about 50% of the tasks that we started with undone. It can be very satisfying ticking the things off on the way, and in fact some people have even been guilty on occasion of writing in a task once they've already completed it just for the satisfaction of ticking it off. I'm sure there are one or two of you out there that can relate to that. But the fact of the matter is, it's not the greatest way to organise our day. When we ask people why they use this methodology, why they organise themselves this way, they say, I don't know, I just figured it out. I looked over my shoulder, someone else was doing it. But the fact of the matter is they haven't been taught the best way to manage their activities or their tasks. And now let's look at clarity a little bit further and explore this a little further. Typically, the way that a company gets clarity and executes on clarity is through the corporate cascade that you can see here. They might employ a bunch of high-paid strategy experts to set the company strategy, and this then gets handed down to the divisional goals, the divisional chiefs who set their goals. These, hopefully, get translated into some meaningful key performance indicators, which then translate into key projects and activities that people should be doing in their day-to-day task. However, this can often be subject to the Chinese whispers syndrome, with the tasks at the end often bearing very little relevance or direct relationship to the strategy at the top. Now, it doesn't mean people are doing this intentionally. When we talk to people, they all want to do the best job they can when they get to work. It's just that the environment is not so conducive. The obstacles to doing great work include the high workloads people are subjected to, often a lack of clarity and difficulty focusing in that environment. So there's a large gap often between the goals that we're expected to achieve and the actions that we're taking. So we wonder why 66% of corporate strategy is never executed. The thing is that lack of clarity, lack of execution can be related to a number of factors. One of them might be just lacking direction. And you'll notice this if you hear people saying that they don't know what the company's vision is. If you hear that, then they're likely to be quite directionless. People may have clarity, but they may not have the ability to execute. They may not have the tools or the systems or the processes in place. Then there are those people, those lucky few, who are spending enough time on their big ticket items. They're productive and they're doing this well, not at the expense of their family or their outside life. These people, teams or companies, are proactive. They're sustainable, and in other words, they're resilient.
So in order to have a resilient business, it's not just about clarity and execution. We also need to be able to manage ourselves and our adrenaline levels, and also be in a state in which to embrace what we're really trying to do. So we need to be invested and care about what we're involved with. And this speaks to the next pillars, which are engagement and working with others. Now, engagement's when you feel your contribution's worthy, worthwhile, rewarding, and it makes a difference. It taps into using your strengths. Now, these figures that I'm about to present to you, they come from a Gallup poll that's been taking samples of about 80 to 90,000 workers each and every quarter for the last 15 years. So it's probably one of the most comprehensive surveys conducted worldwide. Now, the latest findings, they indicate that 70% of workers are not engaged or actively disengaged. And those latest findings, they seem to be reflected not only from 2000, when Gallup first started to do these quarterly surveys, but pretty much every quarter all the way through. So there hasn't been much change. So those workers who are not engaged or they're actively disengaged, they're emotionally disconnected from their workplaces, and they're also less likely to be productive. Now, I've worked with some elite rowers in my time, and if we can imagine that we have 10 people in a boat. Now, this boat could also be your team, your division, or your organisation. Now, of those 10 people, 3 are busting their guts. They're engaged employees, and they work with passion. They feel a profound connection to their company. They're the ones that drive innovation, and they really move your organisation forward. Now, it's these engaged employees, they're the ones that build your new products and services. They're the ones that generate the new ideas. They're the ones that also create your new ideas and customers. And ultimately, they help to spur the economy on. Now you can see an engaged employee a mile off, as these are the employees that are involved, they're enthusiastic about, and they're committed to their work. They also know the scope of their jobs, and they look for new and better ways to achieve their outcomes. Now they're the ones that are 100% psychologically committed to their work, and they are also the only people in an organisation who really go out and create new customers. Then of those 10 people, of those vote of 10 people, there are 5 who are looking just at the scenery. They're the non-engaged employees. They're essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through their workday. They're putting in time, but they're really not they're bringing their mind, but they're not necessarily bringing their heart to the work. So they don't really have any energy or passion, and they don't bring that into their work. They have a word for this, and that's presenteeism. Now these guys are a little bit more difficult to spot. They're not hostile or disruptive. They show up and they kill time with little or no concern about their customers, productivity, profitability, waste, and so forth. What they're really thinking about is about lunch and when their next break's going to be. They're essentially checked out. Surprisingly, these people are not only a part of your support staff or sales team, but they're also sitting on your executive committee. Now in your boat of 10 people, there are 2 who are actively trying to sink your boat. Now Gallup estimates that just in America alone, these 2 people in your team or in your organisation, these 2 out of the 10, so 20%, they actually cost the US economy $450 to $550 billion each year in lost productivity. Now these guys, they're more likely to steal from their companies. They're also more likely to negatively influence co-workers, miss workdays, and drive their customers away. Now you can spot an actively disengaged worker a mile off. These guys, they're not just unhappy at work, they're actually actively busy acting out their unhappiness at work. Every day, these workers, they undermine their engaged they undermine what your engaged co-workers try to accomplish. So the actively disengaged employees are more or less, they're out to damage the company. They monopolise the manager's time. They have more on-the-job accidents. They account for more quality defects. They contribute to shrinkage, which is another name for theft. They're sicker. They miss more days, and they quit at a higher rate than the engaged employees do. Whatever the engaged employee does, such as solving problems, innovating, and creating new customers, the actively disengaged try to undo. Now, this is according to 2013 research, but as I said before, pretty much there's been no change across all the quarters from 2000 all the way through to 2014, which was the last survey that was done in December 2014. So pretty much you can see here that 30% of your workers are engaged, just over 50%, 52% are disengaged, and 18% are actively disengaged. Now why does this matter? Well, this Gallup research has also found that the top 25% of teams, so they're your most engaged teams, versus the bottom 25% in any workplace, so that they're the most disengaged. They have nearly 50% fewer accidents and have 41% fewer quality defects. What's more, teams in the top 25% versus the bottom 25% incur far less absenteeism and turnover. Now I know this slide, there's always one slide in a slide deck that has too much information, and this is it, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. But if you're interested in the bottom line, literally the bottom line here, profitability and productivity, you can see that the top 25% of engaged teams have far more productivity and profitability than the bottom 25%, who are the most disengaged teams. So again, talking bottom line, let's talk earnings per share. What you can see here is that engaged organisations, they experienced 147% higher earnings per share compared with their competition. So this makes boosting engagement important to you, your team, and your company.
So I imagine you might all be wondering, what is the best way to boost engagement? Well, the number one way is to bolster trust in management. So if we go back to the analogy of the boat, our boat needs a captain who is not only competent, but who the crew feels is confident, in whom they can have confidence, in the knowledge that captain has the skill to keep that boat afloat. But this is a tricky area because trust isn't easy to come by. It's not something that can be bought or manufactured. So, the next how. How does trust in management actually become established? Well, here it is. The first one is that leaders need to actually demonstrate care for their employees. The second one, to demonstrate integrity so that what they act, the things that they do, is reflected in the things that they say, and there's a wholeness about their actions. And the last one there, to demonstrate competence. And so this actually looks relatively simple. However, when you consider that we are all operating in a constant world of evolution, particularly technological evolution, but cultural evolution, things change quickly. And our ability to both be and appear on top of our game is challenging, to say the least. And as we face those challenges and as our adrenaline rises in high-pressure situations, our ability to be sensitive and to demonstrate care is often somewhat compromised, even if our intention is good and we really do care. However, there are some really positive observations that arise from the engagement study which point to some clear practices which establish and build trust through these three key factors. As was demonstrated, and Kell was talking about the boat where you've got people who are actively actually trying to sink the boat, what I'd like to really focus on here are those people, because that's where a lot of the risk in your business and in your organisation, that's where the risk is sitting. So one of the practices that a leader or a manager can engage in is simply ignoring the team and really not paying any attention at all to them. What I'd like you to have a think about is, what percentage of people do you think would actively disengage, would choose to actively disrupt, if the manager simply ignored them? Write down a number right in front of you there. Alrighty, let's have a look. So if a manager ignores and simply pays no attention to what's happening and pays no attention to effort that is applied, then nearly half, 40% of your workforce will actively disengage, will be looking to sink the boat. So there's a great danger there, and there's a great danger in busyness and not being able to reflect on what the most important action a leader can take is. A lot of us often say, think of all the one-on-ones that get skipped because we're just too busy. So obviously not a particularly happy boat that we're looking at there. There's another management behaviour that is often demonstrated as well, and you might often see this, and particularly I think we can be guilty of treating our better workers like this, where our expectation is that their work's going to be great, so all we ever actually notice is the things that aren't quite right. So I wonder what percentage of a workforce would actually choose to actively disengage if a manager just focuses on your weaknesses. So you come into work and fundamentally you're getting hammered. Only the things that you're doing incorrectly are really being focused on. What I'd like you to do, just write down a number, a percentage that you think might disengage under those circumstances. Now, often people find this one really interesting because what you see there is the percentage of active disengagement in your workforce is actually a little bit less if you're getting hammered than if you're completely ignored. This is really interesting. I guess it speaks to the idea that any kind of attention is better than no attention at all, and I think any of us as parents will recognise behaviours that are designed to draw attention of one kind or another. I think both these slides are also particularly interesting in that even where people are fundamentally ignored or where their weaknesses are being constantly focused on, a large number of people keep trying. And so people's self-esteem is very closely caught up with being in the workforce and wanting to do a good job. So what we see is there's actually a lot of very good will there that's not being exploited in terms of really improving the performance of the business there. In these sorts of boats or in these sorts of businesses, some of the behaviours can be very unattractive, however. And I think we've all been in businesses where we see this kind of behaviour, where gossip, where malicious talk is either centred perhaps around the leader or perhaps around each other. And so that sort of management behaviour is really very destructive. Let's have another look. What about this management behaviour? What about if a manager just focuses on your strengths and really keeps reinforcing things that are being done well? Just write down a number in front of you. What percentage of your workforce do you think would actively choose to disengage if their leader is actually focusing on the things that they're doing well? Not surprisingly, perhaps, just 1%. I think the power of this slide almost speaks for itself. That's a huge difference, isn't it? So if a manager, if a leader can actually draw out what people are really good at doing, not only do they get a real gain in performance, but they're also contributing to the quality of these people's lives. They're 6 times more likely to be engaged in their work, but not only that, 3 times more likely to report a better quality of life. There's some nice research that sits around this, and this is done by a lady called Barbara Fredrickson. And what she discovered is that when sitting in workplaces, there was a kind of a formula that sits around this. And in workplaces where feedback and the sort of acknowledgements were around about in these proportions, 3 positives to 1 negative, that represented businesses that were flourishing, that were doing really very well. If that number slips to below 3, then it starts pretty much on the road to ruin, where our business is really under risk and is threatened. There's an interesting space on the other side where the number of positives exceeds 13. We also are posing a risk to the business in that we're not actually addressing some of the things that need to be addressed. As a quick FYI, that number changes in terms of relationships. There's the number there, and in terms of managing relationships, the number's around 5 positives to 1 negatives. So probably something for us all to have a little bit of a think about here. So Gallup suggests, obviously, that people who receive strengths feedback and the companies they work for tend to be better performers. I guess that's not terribly surprising. But how much better, I think, is of interest, and this is from an Australian study. They have 14.9% lower turnover rates, 12.5% greater productivity, and 8.9% greater profitability, probably something that we'd all like to take away. I'll hand over to Matt now to address the last pillar, which is around working and oneself.
Thanks, Kimberley. So the thing is that even with all of the other pillars functioning, our businesses can still lack resilience when the individuals inside the businesses are struggling with their own issues. And this is the situation in many workplaces. Busy, distracted and overwhelmed, stressed, unproductive, unmotivated. Most people aren't doing their best work even when they know what they should be doing, when they've got the tools that they need and the systems and processes in place. And the reason for this is that the fundamental tool we use to do any work, anything for that matter, is our attention. And it can sometimes feel like that's being stolen from us. It feels like we're losing the power to choose what we do or how we approach it. And we're becoming very reactive in an attempt to get on top of our busy lives. So bring on mindfulness. There's been lots of buzz around the word mindfulness, and for very good reason. But is it just a fad? What is it? Let's explore it a little bit further. Because after all, left to its own devices, our minds will tend to fill up with whatever happens to present itself anyway. It's full most of the time. So what do we mean by mindfulness? At its simplest, we mean the ability to choose what we're filling our mind with. What are we giving our attention to? And there's a lovely quote here from William James, who was a philosopher and a psychologist at the beginning of the 1900s, and he said this: "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character and will." And I think that's a beautiful quote, and it does refer to this practice of mindfulness and being able to master our attention. It is, after all, the capability that supports all else. Nothing happens without our attention. Now, many of you will already have tried to implement or may already be implementing some form of mindfulness practice. And I'd really love it if you can, if you're giving me your attention at the moment and haven't gone off checking your emails and things on your smartphone, then could you please just put your hand up if you're currently meditating or actively following some sort of mindfulness practice. Yeah, as I thought, with an audience like this, there are certainly a lot of you will be interested in this topic. So, how many of you have actually tried to implement some form of mindfulness practice and have given up? I suspect there might be even more of you than those that are continuing. Now, why might this be? Because really, at its heart, mindfulness is an extremely simple thing to implement, but it's not easy. And I suspect many of you have tried but found that it's hard and you've given up. And those of you who've done that might be a little disheartened as to its value. Those of you who are still meditating or practicing mindfulness, you'll know exactly what I'm about to talk about and you won't need any convincing. But for the others, let me just try and explain why it's worth doing. How do we know it's worth doing? Is it just a fad or should we persevere? Well, whether we've engaged in any formal practice or not, we'll all have experience of acting with presence and awareness, moments when we're fully engaged in the work or the play. All of the knowledge you need is at hand and you're in a state of flow and you can see very clearly what you need to be doing. Now, sometimes this just happens by chance, by accident, and it's wonderful when it does. But if we want to really become masterful at work, we must learn to direct our attention on purpose, to master our minds, to bring all of our intelligence and our power to the work. So what other evidence is there other than our experience? Well, the philosophy is there for all to see. For more than 3,000 years, philosophers have been talking about the benefit of meditation or mindfulness in stilling the mind, from the ancient Egyptians and ancient Indians to the Greeks and through to the modern day. What about the science? Every week brings more research on how mindfulness works and how effective it is. Neuroscientists are discovering how it affects the brain. Medical researchers are analysing its health benefits. And social scientists are showing how it can change our lives and our society. They're all returning positive results like reduced stress, increased productivity, reduced conflict, and greater resilience. But so much for philosophy and science. What we're really interested in here is the business. And it's taking off like wildfire. It's becoming almost mainstream now for businesses to implement some sort of mindfulness training. You may know that Google have implemented a program called Search Inside Yourself, and it's the most popular training they've ever implemented. A company called General Mills, one of the 4 largest food conglomerates in the world, builds meditation rooms into every one of their buildings. The Dow Chemical Company has just undertaken a wonderful study on the benefits of mindfulness in their business, and I'll just refer back to that a little bit later. Parts of the British government are doing it. This slide shows a meditation session from the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago. Successful sporting teams are using it. The benefits are really in. But just for those of you who want a little bit more evidence, a study was done quite a few years ago now of top companies in Mexico. I think there were about 20 leading companies participated, and they had a large number of people engaged in meditation practices. It was a great scientific study, and we can give you the references to that if you're interested. They had a control group meditating, a group meditating, a control group not meditating, and a group of observers. And at the end of the exercise, in fact, 6 months later, they came back and measured them. And you see the stress level graph there is a self-reported one. So people who meditated reported, and this is inverse, this graph, it's the only one that's inverse, they reported a much lower incidence of stress, experience of stress. The other graphs are from the observers to this study, and they found that the people who meditated had improved their ability to lead others. They improved their ability to assimilate change, and they improved their ability significantly to manage conflict. And these are benefits that actually still felt 6 months down the track. So how do we proceed with this? As long as we're just talking about mindfulness, it just becomes another one of those things that fills our mind. It can, won't change anything, and in fact it could become part of the problem if we're busily worrying about engaging in some mindfulness practice. So most of us are somewhere on the continuum between a Buddhist monk and a neuroscientist. Most of us have a board of directors to report to, so how do we go about this in a practical way that does have an impact on the bottom line? Well, the good news is that it doesn't take much time. As little as 5 minutes a day engaged in a mindfulness practice while we're engaged in work can be really helpful. And there are many simple ones that you can be taught and have great impact. There's a quote from the Dalai Lama, who was a very, very busy, is a very successful, busy person that you'll all know, has a busy schedule. And he commits to a practice of meditation 1 hour every day. And he was asked how he does this on his really, really busy days. An interviewer said, how do you do this? How do you sacrifice an hour a day to meditation? And he said, it's very simple. I just commit to it. I just meditate for an hour a day, except on those days when I'm really busy. On those days that I'm really busy, I meditate for 2 hours a day. So for those of you who think it's still a little bit touchy-feely and may not be convinced, I will just draw your attention to the results, the final conclusions of that Dow Chemical Company study into the benefits of mindfulness practice. I quote, "Our results suggest that mindfulness training is more than just an effective stress management solution, but an efficacious intervention for the development of positive organisational behaviour, which can be used throughout the employee base. Widespread application has the potential to result in significant employer competitive advantage through a combination of improved employee well-being, enhanced human performance and decreased healthcare costs." I don't think I can recommend it any more strongly. Thanks, Cholena.
Fabulous. Well, we've had a fairly full 45 minutes, and I hope you've learned as much as I have about how to build a resilient business. And clearly the evidence is in that it's all about clarity, execution, engagement, working with others, and managing self. I hope that you've taken some learning out of today, and in a moment I'll take any questions and I'll ask the panel your questions. What I wanted to do though first was just tell you a little about our business. Now, Pack Executive helps you, your team and your company become and stay leaders in your field. Now, if you'd like to work with Matt, Kell or Kimberley, please get in contact with me or one of our coaching team, and I can talk to you about how we can help your business and how we can help yourself personally. Likewise, we have our productivity intensive starting at the end of the month, and I'll send you some further information about that after today's session. So thank you. We've already got some questions, which is fantastic. Now, the first question is, do the Gallup engagement results translate into the Australian public sector? Now, Angela, thank you for that. And we don't have any figures on us now, but I will ask Kell what he thinks in terms of the engagement results there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When looking over the Gallup research, what they do is they de-identify the companies, and they de-identify so that particular companies aren't known in that regards. But what they do tell us is that from about 2000 onwards through to 2015, the percentages haven't changed. Now, my understanding of the Gallup research is that they don't make differentiation across public service and private companies. But however, I will look into that and come back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Angela. Look, the next question is for Matt. Now, Matt, I'm sure most of us aren't going to commit to an hour a day. So what's your recommendation for someone who's starting a mindfulness practice? What would you suggest to them?
The answer to that is simple, Cholena, 2 hours a day. No, quite seriously. It has been shown that just just even 5 minutes a day engaged in rest, real mental rest. And that's what it's about. It's about calming down what they call the monkey mind, which darts about all the time. Effectively, all you need to do is to sit anywhere in the office. You can do this in an open plan office and just connect with the physical senses. Often it's just connecting with the listening. An effective way is connecting just with the sense of touch, of the breath, just the breathing. And you can do this without crossing your legs or dressing in orange, and you can do it without your colleagues even noticing. But just doing that even for a minute at a time between activities can be really effective, and just regathers all our powers really, and then we can give our attention fully to the next task. So it doesn't have to be time consuming.
Perfect. Now, still send through your questions. We've got a little bit more time to answer them. The next question is for Kell. Now, Kell, in terms of coaching for performance, how does your work with the white-collar sector differ to your work when you're coaching Olympians?
Well, there's a lot of similarities between, say, in the corporate world to the athletic world. Both need to be performing at a high level. Both need to be focused on the things that matter most, and also both need to nurture the relationships with the direct reports in the corporate world and with the support staff in the athletic world. So in regards to the question, yes, there are differences in the context, but it's quite similar. In terms of how the coaching would carry out.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that the Olympians are just better looking and better bodies?
Well, on average, they're usually taller, slimmer, than the general cohort.
Now, Kimberley, I think you may be able to answer this one. Now, you talked about clarity. What does that look like in terms of building a strategy? And I'm sure that will take more than a few minutes. But if I were to say to you, I just don't have the strategy formed, what would you tell me to do as a CEO of a company? Where would I start?
Okay, thank you, Cholena. If we were to look at developing strategy, we would initially work with the team to ensure that the goals are clearly articulated. One of the things that we find very often in walking into a business is that we begin the work and find that they themselves are not particularly clear on what it is that they're trying to do, and so that lack of clarity follows all the way down the line. So the first thing we need to be able to do is to make sure that those goals are articulated in very clear, plain and simple language. Following on from there, we need to set up a structure or a set of behaviours that enable teams to be able to share in that vision, because while, as we all know, sometimes we can get very excited and enthusiastic about a particular vision, and when we try to share that with others, suddenly those lights don't seem to be going on for them. So there are practices that we can put in place that enable that vision to be shared, and not only shared, but able to flex and to be able to be responsive to changes in the environment as they go forward. Because there's an equal danger, I guess, in lack of clarity, where a strategy becomes fixed and written in blood, where the environment itself is actually changing. So we like to promote an idea of sort of conversational management practice which keeps everybody on board and keeps everybody's vision shared, clearly articulated, and therefore able to be executed and worked together on. And so this we find makes a fabulous difference in organisations.
Fantastic. Excellent. I really put the three of you on the spot there, so thank you very much. It looks like that closes out our questions for today, so thanks again everyone. Thank you for attending today. We've had a lot of interest prior to the session, and as promised I will share the recordings early next week with you. So I'll sign off now. If you've got any further questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today, please feel free to email me, and that's cholena.orr@pacexecutive.com. or give me a call. My phone number is 03 9602 9890. Thanks everyone.